I'm sure many of you have heard the story of Humpty Dumpty. You know, he climbed on a wall, fell off, and all the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put him back together again. Well, that's just the beginning of the story. This is the story of Humpty Dumpty after the fall.
Martha says, volume up. You got it.
Humpty Dumpty says, "My name is Humpty Dumpty. This is my favorite spot, high on the wall. I know it looks like an odd place for an egg to be, but I loved being close to the birds. Then one day I fell. I'm sort of famous for that. Folks called it the Great Fall, which sounds kind of grand. It's just an accident, but it changed my life." You see, fortunately, all the king's men and all the king's horses did in fact put me back together again. However, there were some parts that couldn't be healed with bandages and glue. After that day, I was afraid of heights, and I was so scared that it kept me from enjoying all my favorite things. I guess he had to get fiber flakes rather than Choco Duck cereal. He'd walk past the wall every day, and he said I would think about climbing the ladder again. I really missed the birds and being high above the city, but I could never do it because I knew that accidents can happen. Well, he said, I eventually settled for watching the birds from the ground. It wasn't the same, but it was better than nothing. Then one day, an idea flew by. I don't know what that is. He decided to make paper airplanes. So, he said, making airplanes was harder than I thought. It's easy to get cuts and scrapes and scratches. But one day, I kept trying and trying until I got just the right one. You see? And then my plane was perfect. It flew like nothing could stop it. I hadn't felt this happy for a long time. It wasn't the same as being up in the sky with the birds. But it was close enough. Unfortunately, accidents happen. They always do. What happened? Well, looks like his airplane got stuck on the wall. He said, I almost walked away again, but then I thought about the time I spent working on my plane and all the other things I'd missed. I decided I was going to climb that wall. And he did. But the higher I got, the more nervous I felt. I didn't want to admit it, but I was terrified. Look at that, he's climbing. I didn't look up, I didn't look down, I just kept climbing, one step at a time. until I was no longer afraid. It's up on that wall. Maybe now you won't think of me as that egg who was famous for falling. Hopefully, you will remember me as the egg who got back up on the wall. See that? And what happened? Looks like something happened there. He broke out of the egg and he said, "And I learned how to fly." There's my pants, my shirt.
I found a quote from Atlanta-based itinerant chaplain and mystic Laura Jean Truman this week. It goes, "I'm learning to stop asking God, how do I get back to where I was? And learning to start asking, how do I get to this new thing? This thing you're calling me into?" This quote spoke to me about Easter, about the pandemic, and about this beloved community. After Jesus' death, some of his believers put him in a tomb. And after 3 days, the story goes, the stone in front of the tomb had been rolled away, and the tomb was empty. Later, he appeared to his followers and called them to preach his teachings to everyone. Some scholars believe that the story of the resurrection of Jesus was the reason the Christian church started and spread so rapidly around the world at the time. It was such a miraculous thing. But here's the thing. The idea of resurrection was not unique. Other religious traditions of the time had stories of resurrections, and even earlier religious traditions had stories of resurrections. For instance, in the Mediterranean basin, the oldest divinity reputed to have risen from the dead, in some sense, was the god Osiris. In the myth, his brother Seth cut him into little pieces. An ancient pyramid text writes, "Osiris awakes, the god once slack rouses, the god stands up, the god takes control of his body." After his resurrection, Osiris begins to reign in the netherworld. And there's even a Ptolemaic Roman temple which depicts the mummified Osiris rising from the dead. And these aren't the only ones. Think of the earth-centered traditions, both of the past and present. They honored the rising of the sun in the winter solstice, the return, and the return of plant life in the spring with the spring equinox. It's not just these religious traditions. That sense of resurrection is a common human feeling. From a psychological point of view, the concept of one going into a dark time or a dark place in their life, coming through it, and somehow being reborn or having a new perspective on life or having gotten through the time and able to live again a full life. Well, we've talked to our clients. I've talked to my clients when I was a psychotherapist about getting through those periods, even asking them to affirm those times when they have gone through those dark periods and come out the other side, moving that great stone they felt was before them out back into the world reborn. Think for a moment of our story of Humpty Dumpty and his, if you would call, resurrection or transformation. He fell off the wall, but wasn't completely put back together, and psychologically damaged. But he found a path, while even being psychologically damaged, to kind of bring his life back to some extent, making those paper airplanes. And through that path, eventually finding a way back to where he was when he fell off that wall, back on the wall, and was transformed, resurrected into a bird. He was liberated from his life as an egg and reborn as a bird. When we hear the myth of Jesus, or maybe this story of Humpty Dumpty's after the fall, I wonder, do you remember a time for yourself when you experienced difficulty? Maybe like right now as we experience this pandemic. Something difficult that you have to go through. And then coming through that and coming out the other side, remembering that you can do that. That we all have been through difficult periods and all come through them in one form or fashion. And come through it, in a sense, more whole or more holy. Perhaps having a different perspective on what it was to be in the tomb or in the eggshell when we've come out of it. You know, this pandemic makes me feel very much like I'm in an eggshell, locked in my home, restricted from seeing people I love, at least face to face. And here's the thing. I just don't feel that the things are going to return to the normal that we all had before this COVID-19 happened. And I'm wondering, perhaps like many of you, what will the future be like when we don't have to be physically distant from one another, or at least not locked in our homes? Keith Cron, the Unitarian Universalist Transitions Officer, reflected on this on his face page, and let me share what he said. He said, we all get to learn something new now. I've been wondering this afternoon if that's the opportunity for the future. Maybe we get to learn how to live into a new reality together. Maybe we can model how to share, be present, be alive on the level playing field now. Maybe it's time religion, in whatever form it takes after this, fails more and becomes more important again. I've been thinking a lot about what he said. You know, your staff here, myself, Steve, our worship associates, Joseph, we've been working on getting this live stream going. And I've been thinking about all the opportunities it will offer for this congregation and our message getting out to the world through the internet so that more people will know about Unitarian Universalism and about the Unitarian Universalist congregation in Miami. And then over these past 3 Sundays, problems, technical problems. We couldn't start on time. The sound didn't work. Again today, difficulties. But here's the thing. You all texted us, Steve and I, letting us know when things weren't working, when you couldn't hear or you wondered why it hadn't started. Martha mentioned to me on the chat last week that during the live stream, some of you cheered when you saw me take my phone out of my pocket and look at the text that you'd sent. No, so that I would know and Steve would know that something was wrong. Making this live stream work for this congregation and for all those watching is a team effort. With so many of you reaching out to Steve and I about the sound issues, you and I and Steve ended up being very connected in a way we may not have anticipated. We are all part of the team. And together, we fix the problem. And from that, I realized that even though I'm in this dark time, like all of us are, this in-between time, this time from the normal we had to whatever it's going to be in the future, this in-between time, this transition time, we're not alone. However this pandemic turns out, whatever changes we have to adjust to, however we face the trauma of this experience, I now know in my heart, in my mind, in my very bones, that we are all in this together, and we will find a way. Keith went on to write in his Facebook page, maybe it's the moment we learn and relearn how to be humble. This is the moment when I pray for simplicity, complexity, awe, wonder, and an end to the binary and duality and the arrogance of having to be enough. Maybe I'm beginning to realize how it was never about being enough. He goes on, though I hope I keep learning it and being open to learning more, even when I don't want to or think I need to, especially when I don't think I need to. What these words are really speak to me. I know I've had a lot of experience in ministry, experience with the internet, Zoom, live streaming, so many things. But right now it's time for me to be humble and not feel like I need to do everything. This is a time for me, perhaps for you as well, to put aside what I know and be open to what I'm going to learn during this time and to what I may be called to do after this time, as we move into a new world with changes we can't fully anticipate right now. And I ask myself, how will I prepare for that call? Right now, each of us is having different experiences during this in-between time. Life was one way, a way we were used to, comfortable with, and it's gone. We're waiting to find out how life will be after this. What do we do while waiting for resurrection, change, transformation, a new world, a new perspective on life? Can we wait with a humble spirit, learning what we can about ourselves, each other, what we really need, maybe not so much toilet paper, what we can adapt to, and what we will not be willing to adapt to. What will the world need from us after this time of isolation? Will we be able to answer whatever call is asked of us? Here I am wondering about Humpty Dumpty again, playing with paper airplanes to find new meaning and purpose in this in-between time. What are your paper airplanes right now that you're playing with to get through this time? And then I remember, it wasn't until he climbed back up on the wall that he'd fallen off of, until he'd faced his fears and accepted that change happens, that he was transformed. I don't know if this is our time of Lent and preparation or our time of Easter when there is change and resurrection. But we will be prepared if we just open ourselves with a humble spirit. As I've been thinking about all this, I remembered a poem by T.S. Eliot. And the end of all our experiencing, and all our exploring, will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time. Through the unknown, remembered gate, when the last of earth left to discover is that which was the beginning. At the source of the longest river, the voice of the hidden waterfall, and the children in the apple tree, not known because not looked for, but heard, half heard, in the stillness between two waves of the sea.